everyone to the second edition of Elephant Fest Book Fair. Today we are meeting MJ Arlidge, our beloved writer and author. He was supposed to come in Romania for a book launch, but because of the pandemic situation, our meeting was cancelled. But Mr. Arlidge, we are expecting you as soon as possible. My first questions for you. Did you ever dream to see Ini Mini, your debut crime novel, hitting the top positions in bestsellers list and be translated in, I don't know, maybe 25 countries so soon after its launch?
No, it was a great and pleasant surprise. I think when you write a book, you write your first book normally in secret, and you write it away, and then you're just hoping that somebody will publish it in your own country, and that's always very exciting. But then I remember immediately afterwards, people, Germany, France, Romania, other people started buying it, and it was a great surprise to me that other countries were interested as well. And yeah, it's one of those things that I think I wrote it as I was approaching my 40th birthday, so it was my sort of midlife crisis was writing this novel, and then it was just an amazing surprise when it took off, and it really did change my life, really. So I'm very glad I wrote it.
I absolutely love Helen Grace. She is a truly amazing character. She is a very good professional. She has a very dark past, and she struggles with so many, I don't know, inside she is a torment.
Yeah.
How did you create this character?
Well, I generally prefer writing women, female characters. I find them more interesting and complex than men. So I knew I wanted a female police officer. And then I was just it was partly trying to avoid some of the stereotypes of police officers with alcohol problems or troubled marriages. So I wanted to make a non-drinker, a girl who's sort of a woman who's always single and quite isolated. And then I think when I was sort of creating her, I'd been reading a lot of The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, that trilogy, and the Lisbeth Salander character. And there are sort of shades of Lisbeth in Helen, because it was one of the few books I'd read, detective books, where I thought the heroine was almost more interesting than the criminals. Often it's the sort of Hannibal Lecters, or you're interested in the bad guys, aren't you? And the cops are sort of, But this one, I thought, wow, she's so interesting and hard to define and complex. And I thought, well, I want to try and make Helen as exciting as her. And so that's sort of where it came from. And then in terms of all her darkness and all her sort of unusual hobbies, I wanted to make sure that she had some ability to release her dark emotions, and I thought it would be interesting if the way she did that was with somebody who she paid, this guy Jake. And I thought, well, that's kind of interesting if that's her closest emotional relationship, is with someone that she sort of pays to be with. It's sort of unusual. So she's an enjoyable mess, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, everybody loves her.
Yeah, that's good.
When you wrote Ini Mini, did you anticipate a whole series or just a standalone novel?
No, I think because my day job is in television, making television drama, and when you're doing that, you think in big series. So things that in America it's 24 episodes, or in the UK it's 6, 8, 10, whatever. And so you tend to think in big numbers. And so when I sat down with Penguin, who was publishing Ini Mini for the first time, I said, I gave them an idea for like the first 7, I think it was, novels in the Helen Grace series. I said, look, I want it to be a long-running series, and this is what happens in number 2. And of course, we've changed that along the way, but it showed them at least that I had ideas and also an ambition to make, to Helen a sort of a long-standing. And now people often say, how many will you do? And I think, well, Helen is strong and determined. She can keep going. And I think we should try and get to 20 at least. Why not?
Yeah, it would be very nice. Let's talk about each of the Helen Grace series, volumes, sorry, in terms of inspiration and plot. Which was the moment you knew that's the plot for the first volume, second volume, and so on?
Oh, wow. Okay. That's a detailed question. Well, the inspiration always comes from different places. And so Ini Mini I came up with that when shows like Big Brother and all those things were very popular, and all those sort of talent shows where you had to sort of evict people from the house or say, did you value this person more or that person more? And it was a culture that was full of judgment, where everyone was judging how valuable people's lives were. And so in a way, the idea was to use that, but take it up a notch. So basically it's a matter of life and death, deciding who lives and who dies. And I like that moral choice of trying to work out, is a woman's life worth more than a man, or vice versa? Or if someone has children, is their life worth more than someone who doesn't? I quite like the morality of that question. So that was that one. The next one, Pop Goes the Weasel in English, I wanted to do a sort of a reverse of Jack the Ripper. So because prostitutes are always the victims in real life and in fiction, they're always the ones who get killed. So I thought it would be fun to reverse that and flip it. And so that was that one. And then I could go on. The third one is I like the Doll's House was a nice one, because that one I had the idea when I was on holiday with my children, and we were in it with another family, and the kids always wanted to sleep together, so they would all go in, but I knew that one of them would wake each other up in the night if we left them. So I would creep in and I would pick up my daughter and take her back to her bedroom so she could get a good night's sleep. And it's as I was carrying her, I realized that each night she went to bed in one bed and then woke up in an entirely different bed. And she never mentioned it. But I thought, that's sort of odd, isn't it? And I thought, well, what would that be like if that was a grown woman who went to bed in one place and woke up somewhere else? How unnerving and terrifying that would be. Yeah, and so that was one which definitely was inspired by my children. But they all come from very different places. Most of it, I would say, only one out of the first 10. I'm just sort of writing the 10th one at the moment. Only one out of 10, I would say, is based on a newspaper or something that actually happened. Most of it is just me having an idea and thinking, ooh, that's really unpleasant. I can do something with that, and whether you're watching TV or in a movie or whatever, things just suddenly, often in the supermarket, suddenly something just pops up and you think, oh, I can do something with that.
Yeah. So in Hide and Seek, this is the one. This is the one we translated. Love Me Not, it's on its way to the print.
Okay.
Will be out in November.
Okay.
But Hide and Seek, you took Helen Grace to prison. And make her vulnerable and so lonely and so scared about the things around her. How did you do your research for this volume? Because I think it's very hard to describe a prison, and you did it very, very well. I think the atmosphere, it's so powerful.
Thank you. Well, I must say, of all the books, this is probably my favorite one. So it's because I always like the idea of being stuck in a prison with a serial killer. I thought it's such an unpleasant idea. You think, oh, it'd be sort of terrifying. And so, I mean, this is based on a real prison. Holloway is or was. It's shut now. And but when I was writing it, it was literally in its last year, and it was slightly falling apart. And there had been quite a lot of documentaries made about it. So I watched a lot of those and went on. And the thing about the internet now is there's so much good research. Obviously, there's lots of nonsense too, but there's lots of really good research now, because we live in quite a sort of confessional culture where people want to share their emotions and share their experience. And so there's lots of interesting stuff about prisons. And I must say, writing this book was probably the most interesting experience I've had, because I thought it would be quite sort of gothic and blood on the walls and people running and rattling the bars. And it has a bit of that. But actually, when I was reading about women in prison and what that means, I began to realize that it's a very different thing to men going to prison, because women are normally the main caregivers to children. And so if you put a woman, particularly a mother, in prison, then obviously it impacts her, but it also impacts the children and everything else. So you can have a massive problem, a massive legacy. And most women are not violent offenders. So you have to say, well, is it a good use of time to put them in prison when the effects on their family are so great, you know? And so so the whole novel changed in my head when I started to think about family and the effects of imprisonment and what it does to you psychologically and emotionally. And I found the whole process, you know, really just sort of fascinating. And it made me think, well, actually, perhaps there is a big problem here in I don't know what it's like in Romania, but in the UK, where we still lock up too many people who are not a threat to anyone else, and it causes massive problems further down the line. So I have to say it was the most enjoyable and exciting Helen Grace book I've written, and probably still my favorite.
In Romania, we need to build some more prisons or to change the system, because they are overcrowded.
Oh, yeah. Well, exactly. Yeah.
We have a few prisons for women, so they are stacked together.
Yeah. No, well, it's exactly the same here, and they're trying to build new ones, but it's I don't know, it never seems to be quite enough. But very interesting, and I learned quite a lot writing that book. So I'm educating myself as I'm writing, which is nice.
In all the novels of the series, I saw, besides the crime plot, there is also something about the society, about the women in a police, women as a professional police officers. In hide and seek, we have the prison environment, guards and their little universe, which is very tough. So have you thought of making from the Helen Grace series some sort of series that depicts some social issues?
That's not sort of the main point. I mean, I think that they are quite commercial books. Their principal job is to entertain, and it's interesting that all through the pandemic, sales of crime books have gone up rather than down. And even though there's lots of death and illness, people still like the excitement of a good thriller. But I think what's possibly slightly different about my books in some ways is that they are pretty much dominated by female characters, you know, with Helen, with Charlie. Often the killers are female as well, whatever. And I think that inevitably that brings some social issues into it, because women generally are still discriminated against and have a much harder time than men. And I think that in a way you can't sort of ignore that. You have to portray that. And I think particularly, you know, women, for example, women in prison or female prisoners are judged much more harshly than men, because I think stereotypically people expect men to be bad and women to be good, you know. And so if you're a female prisoner, then you are often judged much more harshly than a man would be. And I think that's definitely the case with Helen as well, because, you know, she's a woman in quite a male dominated industry. So she would experience problems and prejudice and all the rest of it. And in a way that's sad that that's what real life is like, but it's good for a novel writer because it makes life harder for your protagonist. And you know, it was one thing I remember when I was watching, there was a Kenneth Branagh version of the Wallander novels, and I was watching them, and you know, these awful things kept happening to Wallander, and you thought, well, that's sort of in a way the novelist's job, is to throw as many rocks at your hero or your heroine as possible, and see how they survive and see whether they can overcome it. And in a way, that's why, you know, putting Helen in a job where it's still quite male dominated is good, because it makes her life harder.
Yeah, you did a great job with Helen Grace, because she has a very hard life.
Yeah, no, she does. Absolutely.
All your books have a very cinematic feel. I mean, reading, you also see the movie in your head. Mm-hmm. Is it because you also are a screenwriter, and maybe your writing has its own mark to create?
I think so, because, you know, there are so many different ways to write a novel, and, you know, you can write in the first person, so, you know, I did this, whatever, and those novels are much more about the interior life of the subject. I think I tried to write Eeny Meeny like that, and I got so bored and fed up, I changed it and said, right, I'll do it in the third person, so we'll have Helen standing, and that really worked, because then I could get I could change the point of view to go to the killer, to go to Charlie, to go to whoever it may be, and that meant I could write it like a screenplay, where you have quite short scenes or quite short chapters, and then by jumping around, you create lots of energy, pace. But also, because I've started, you know, because I'm screenwriting too, and you know, I'm still learning that skill. But the main thing when you're writing a film script or a TV script is to write in pictures. You know, in a way, if you have no dialogue, then you've succeeded, because the pictures tell all the story. And so you do try and think visually if you can. And I mean, it helps also that I write quite a lot of action. You know, so Helen is on her bike and she's running around and she's being chased. And, you know, that, again, gives it quite a sort of movie feel, you know, rather than characters sitting around a room thinking about their own emotions, you know. And Helen, you know, she's a very active character. She's always getting bashed up, and her bike gets smashed, and, you know, all these things happen. And, you know, and so I try and sort of always get that element in, because I think people enjoy the adrenaline of that, because I want the books to be a big adrenalized thriller. That's what I always set out to do.
Yeah. I would like to see a Helen Grace TV series. Any chance to? Yeah,
well, we're working on it. Yeah, no, well, I think hopefully one day. I think every cop has her day, but you just have to, it's all about timing, and it's tricky at the moment, because lots of stuff's being developed. Not an awful lot is being filmed at the moment because of all the pandemic stuff, but I'm working away at it, because I know that, you know, there's a lot of competition in the UK, because there's lots of different cops that people could, but I know that particularly in Europe, in Romania, France, Germany, particularly Holland, they would love a Helen Grace series. So I'm working on it.
Great news. So after the series, which is not even far from the end, you wrote a standalone novel, A Gift for Dying. Mm-hmm. Why? How did you approach this new project?
So this is basically, I think I'd written about 7 or 8 Helen Grace books by then, and I thought it would be nice to try something different, just as a challenge to me, really, to see if and also to do something that, I mean, it's still a big serial killer thriller, but it has a slight sort of supernatural element now, and I thought, again, that would be interesting, because supernatural is very different. You have to sort of write it in a different way. And I was going to set it all in America, write purely American characters, and just see if I could do that. That was quite a challenge. And, you know, everything's a challenge, isn't it? When you're, if you're a man writing a female character, or if you're a law-abiding citizen writing a serial killer, you have to have a leap of imagination. But for me, writing Cassie, who's a 15-year-old Polish American who can foresee people's death, that's quite a big leap of imagination. So it was quite a nice challenge for me. But it was great, and it's all set in Chicago. So I went over there and spent about 10 days researching it, and was taken around all the dark back streets of Chicago, all the stuff that the tourists don't get to see. And it was one of the best periods of my life, really, because it was such a fascinating, Chicago is a really fascinating city. Everything appears much more dangerous and exciting if you're a European, because you're just not used to that many guns and that much, and the murder rate is like sky high, and it's just sort of crazy, but also a very impressive city. And I really loved just doing that. And then in terms of the idea itself, when I was talking to Penguin about doing a standalone, I just said, look, there's this one idea that I've wanted to do probably for like 20 years. I've had this idea of somebody who could tell you when you died and how you died. And just because it begs an obvious question, is that if somebody could do that, would you ask them, would you want to know, or would you just say, no, I don't want to know, well, what will be will be? And I've always liked that idea, because it's sort of quite an unpleasant or quite a tricky dilemma, isn't it? Because obviously most people would say, I don't want to know, but then it would also be quite tempting to find out in case you only had like a month left or something like that. So, and then you'll just blow all your money and party. But it's, so it's an idea that sort of, I say, I've wanted to do for many years. And it's just, that's one of the nice privileges of doing this job is that I said to them, look, this is, heartfelt idea of mine. What do you think? And they said, go for it. And that was very, very exciting.
Great. I think I would like to know.
Yeah, very good. Oh, well, there you go. Good. Yeah.
So, what do you read these days? Did the pandemic situation change your reading habits?
Yeah, it did a bit in that I mean, our kids, I've got two kids who are 13 and 10, and they were off school from March until September. So it was quite a long time. And my wife and I were sort of helping to homeschool them and all that. And so, it was okay, but it was quite claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And I sort of felt that for my own sanity, what I wanted to try and do in the evening about sort of 6, 7, I would just take myself away for half an hour and just read, somewhere, there's a little room at the top of the house. I'd creep up there and just go by myself and just read. And I found that was really good for one's mental health. And so I've got quite varied taste now. A lot of crime, obviously, but also history books I like. I try to read, I'm nearly finished Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. I thought I would go for a classic, which is nice. And now I'm just starting the political biography. Basically, what somebody who was very close to David Cameron when he was Prime Minister. She's written a book in which she tells you all the dirty secrets. So it's a bit of a gossip fest. But I have to say it's really entertaining, and sometimes it's quite fun to be a bit cheap. And so I have quite varied tastes, and it's interesting because I think women generally read more than men, and they generally love fiction. Men tend to read more factual stuff like history books or sports biographies or whatever it may be. I sort of quite female in a way, as I have quite wide tastes, and of course I love fiction, and I'm happy and yeah, I would read all day long if I could, but sadly I have to write some books myself.
Yeah. Have you thought of writing about a younger audience, maybe, I don't know, young fiction, children's books?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that's sort of, I think, the next thing for me, whether it's sort of Harry Potter age or whether it's a bit older, sort of YA, young adult, sort of whatever. I think there are things again there that I would love to do, because children's books are often sort of more imaginative in a way. You can be more crazy. And if you think of, Harry Potter or, Roald Dahl, some of the more sort of extreme Roald Dahl books are kind of quite surreal in a way.
Yeah.
But they're the books that I used to love when I was a kid with the Roald Dahl books. And whether it's James and the Giant Peach or Fantastic Mr. Fox or the BFG, and you think it'd be so much fun to write something like that where reality is not so important and it's just about the sort of magic of the idea, and so I would definitely, also they tend to be much shorter, so that's good, so they don't take as much time as an adult novel, so that would be helpful.
Yeah. Thank you very much. It was a great interview, and we are expecting you in Romania.
Oh, well, as soon as the quarantine is lifted,
yes, save a place. Save a place in your agenda.
Yeah, I will do. Yeah. Well, it's very nice to talk to you.